That's how we raise the money. Well, how do we spend it? Well, here's looking at 2008, 2009. You see national defense there is the green. Payment for individuals, which would include things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but also things like temporary assistance to needy families and the like, are the tan there. But that's a little bit misleading because that is money that is specifically put into those programs. Social Security, for example, is its own budget. It was moved into the general budget by Reagan in the 80s. Reagan and I should add the Democratic Congress, Tip O'Neill. But that's a little bit misleading because if we were to take away most of those payments to individuals, presumably we would also take away the taxes that fund those: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And that's a little bit misleading picture. Other non-defense spending is the yellow. You can see it's very little. And then the purple is the interest that we're paying on the debt that we've borrowed. A big government requires a lot of money, and as the size of the government increases, the budget increases. In the 1950s and 60s, the Department of Defense received more than half the federal budget. That's still true today if you only count the stuff that we actually have control over. For example, we don't really have control over Social Security spending because that's the people's money they put in, and then they are entitled to get that money back. And we don't really have control over interest payments on our debts because we owe that money and we have to pay it. So if you talk about discretionary spending, money that Congress has control over, the defense budget is still well over half of what we spend. Although once you take into account Social Security payments, for example, and Medicare payments, which again are separately funded by their own taxes, well, Medicare is partially, but not entirely. Then it gets down to about 1/6 of all federal expenditures. And of course, this was a huge ramping up that starts with World War II and continues on into the Cold War, and now in the War on Terror. Defense is a big reason for the growth of government, and you can see here. So the blue is in absolute dollars, the red is adjusted for inflation, and you can see the buildup during Vietnam, the first spike there. Reagan's massive military buildup as part of the Cold War, and then the War on Terror under Bush. There is that final big spike. The biggest part of the federal spending is now for income security programs. Social Security is the largest program. It's been expanded since it was created in 1935, and under LBJ in the 1960s, it came to include disability benefits and Medicare, which is health care for old people. These benefits programs face financial problems because we're living longer and longer. As life expectancies grow and as end-of-life medical care becomes more and more expensive, these programs become more expensive. I heard the other day that I believe it's something like half of all the money we spend on medical care in this country we spend on the last month of people's lives. Of course, as people's health deteriorates, that's when things get expensive. And so here we see the trend in social service spending. But I should also point out again that there are specific taxes that go to pay for these. Social Security, for example, is not funded by income tax, whereas things like defense are. The idea that last year's budget is the best predictor of this year's budget plus some is called incrementalism. Agencies can safely assume they'll get at least what they got last year. Typically, the federal budget works in such a way where you just take the budget from the year before, maybe you increase spending to try to keep up with inflation, so a couple of percent here. And then that's what agencies expect to get. Now, occasionally we come along and we reform them, and budgets get slashed and departments get done away with altogether. But typically this is how it works. Uncontrollable expenditures. These are spending determined by the number of recipients, not a fixed dollar figure. These are mainly entitlement programs where the government pays known benefit to an unknown number of recipients. So, for example, if for some reason a particularly large number of people retired, which is happening as the baby boom generation gets older and older, that increases Social Security spending, although Social Security is not part of the general budget, or it shouldn't be. So that's maybe not a great example. But take, for example, an economic downturn when the number of people on food stamps goes up dramatically. Well, because food stamps and unemployment insurance, for example, are set up in such a way that we pay the people, the potential recipients, what they need. If the economy takes a downturn, the budget for that is going to go up. How much we have to pay to do that is going to spike up. And the only way to control these expenditures is to change the rules. So what you could say is, as the economy turns down, you could say, well, we're going to cut the amount of food stamps that we give in order to stop that from becoming a larger and larger expense. Of course, it works the other way too. The economy starts improving, unemployment insurance and food stamps and things like that will decrease as well.